There's nothing quite like the bond between a child and their dog, a love so pure it can break your heart just watching it. When 9-year-old Emma pressed her face into her dying shepherd's fur, for what everyone believed would be the last time, even the hardest men in Copper Ridge had to look away. The town veterinarian was already preparing his instruments when old Joseph Crowfeather, the Apache medicine man most folks barely noticed anymore, saw something that made him step forward. Around the dying dog, he could see a faint shimmer of light, something he hadn't witnessed in 30 years of healing. The townspeople thought he was just a crazy old man, but Emma looked into his weathered face and saw hope. What Joseph saw that day would change everything for both of them. But what was this mysterious sign, and why did it appear now? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dust never seemed to settle in Copper Ridge, a frontier town that time had forgotten somewhere between the vast Arizona desert and the promise of better days ahead. Joseph Crowfeather had watched 15 summers come and go since he'd first arrived in this place, carrying nothing but a worn leather medicine bundle and the way of traditions that fewer people seem to remember with each passing year. At 68, Joseph moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had learned that every step mattered. His weathered hands, marked by decades of gathering healing plants and performing ancient ceremonies, now spent most days carving small wooden figures that he sold to the occasional traveler. The townspeople of Copper Ridge tolerated his presence. Some even showed him a grudging respect, but few truly understood the depth of knowledge that lived behind his dark, thoughtful eyes. The medicine bundle rested on a simple wooden shelf in his one-room adobe dwelling, its sacred contents unchanged, since his grandfather had passed it to him so many years ago. Inside the soft deerskin pouch lay dried sage, sweetgrass, small stones chosen for their spiritual properties, and a collection of herbs that could heal ailments both of the body and the spirit. Joseph touched it each morning as he had been taught. But in recent years, the ritual had begun to feel hollow, like speaking to an empty room. Emma Patterson lived on the opposite side of town with her Aunt Martha, a stern but well-meaning woman who had taken in her brother's child 3 years ago, when fever claimed both of Emma's parents during a particularly harsh winter. The girl was 9 now, small for her age, but possessed of a quiet strength that reminded Joseph of the mountain wildflowers that somehow thrived in the most unlikely places. Rex, Emma's German shepherd, had been her father's dog originally, a coat, loyal working animal who had guarded their small ranch and helped drive cattle. When Emma's world collapsed around her, Rex became something more precious than gold, the last living connection to the family she had lost. The dog was getting old, his muzzle now more gray than black, but his devotion to the girl never wavered. Where Emma went, Rex followed, and where Rex settled for the night, Emma was never far away. Martha Patterson owned the town's general store, a practical woman who dealt in flour and salt pork rather than sentiment. She loved her niece in her own reserved way, but she struggled to understand the child's deep attachment to what she saw as simply a farm animal. Martha had grown up believing that excessive emotion was a luxury frontier families could not afford, and she worried that Emma's bond with Rex was preventing her from forming proper connections with other children her age. The truth was, there weren't many other children in Copper Ridge. Families came and went like tumbleweeds, always chasing rumors of richer soil or better opportunities somewhere else. Those who stayed were often too busy with the hard business of survival to worry much about their children's social development. Emma attended the small schoolhouse when weather permitted, but she was a quiet student who preferred the company of her four-legged companion to the handful of other pupils who seemed to view her as an outsider. Dr. Marcus Hayes had arrived in Copper Ridge 2 years earlier, a young veterinarian fresh from back east, who brought with him modern ideas about animal care and a black leather bag filled with instruments and medicines. He was a decent man, earnest in his desire to help, but he possessed the certainty of someone who had never encountered a problem that science couldn't solve. The townspeople appreciated his skills, especially the ranchers who depended on healthy livestock for their livelihood, but Dr. Hayes had little patience for what he called folk remedies and superstitious nonsense. Joseph had observed the young veterinarian from a respectful distance, noting how he approached each case with methodical precision. There was nothing wrong with Dr. Hayes's methods. They were often effective and certainly well-intentioned, but Joseph could see that the man treated symptoms rather than understanding the deeper connections between living things. Still, Joseph kept his opinions to himself. He had learned long ago that unsolicited wisdom was rarely welcomed, that the tension between old ways and new ways ran through Copperidge like an underground stream, mostly invisible but always present. The Apache traditions that Joseph carried were viewed with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion by the white settlers. Some folks appreciated his knowledge of local plants and his ability to predict weather patterns, but others saw him as a relic of a more primitive time, someone to be tolerated rather than truly accepted. Dr. Sheriff Tom Bradley was among those who showed Joseph genuine respect. The lawman had seen enough of life to recognize wisdom when he encountered it, and he had consulted with Joseph on several occasions when tracking skills or knowledge of the terrain was needed. Bradley understood that Joseph posed no threat to anyone. Indeed, the medicine man had proven helpful in several difficult situations over the years. The town's other notable residents included Frank Morrison, who ran the saloon and boarding house, Mrs. Catherine Wells, the schoolteacher who had arrived from California with hopes of bringing civilization to the frontier, and old Pete Garrison, the blacksmith whose forge served as an unofficial gathering place for men seeking conversation. Along with horseshoe repair, Emma's daily routine rarely varied. She would wake before dawn to help Martha prepare the store for opening, eat a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge or biscuits, and then walk to school with Rex padding silently beside her. The dog would wait patiently outside the schoolhouse during lessons, greeting Emma with gentle enthusiasm when she emerged for the walk home. Afternoons were spent helping in the store or playing in the dusty spaces between buildings, always with Rex as her shadow and protector. Joseph often observed this routine from his seat on the wooden bench outside his dwelling, whittling small animals from pieces of pine and cottonwood while keeping one eye on the rhythm of the town around him. He had noticed Emma's gentleness. With Rex, the way she spoke to the animal as if he could understand every word, which Joseph believed he probably could. Animals possessed wisdom that humans had largely forgotten, and children often retained the ability to communicate in ways that adults dismissed as imagination. The girl reminded Joseph of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. There was something about the way she moved, the tilt of her head when she was listening intently, that stirred memories he thought he had buried. Perhaps it was simply that she possessed the kind of open heart that seemed increasingly rare in a world that demanded hardness as the price of survival. Rex himself was an impressive animal, despite his advancing years. Joseph could see the intelligence in the dog's amber eyes, the way he assessed situations and responded not just to Emma's commands, but to her moods and needs. This was not merely a well-trained pet, but a true companion bound to the girl by something deeper than simple loyalty. As spring moved toward summer, Joseph began to notice subtle changes in Rex's behavior. The dog moved a little more slowly on hot days, took longer to rise from his favorite resting spot in the shade beside the general store, and sometimes seemed to tire more easily during the longer walks that Emma loved to take along the creek that ran behind the town. These were small signs, the kind that someone less observant might miss entirely, but Joseph had spent a lifetime reading the language that all living things spoke. If you knew how to listen, He kept these observations to himself, knowing that there was little to be gained by sharing concerns that might prove unfounded. But the medicine man in him, the part that had been trained from childhood to recognize the signs of imbalance in the natural world, understood that Rex was entering the final season of his life. The knowledge sat heavy in Joseph's chest, not because he feared death itself, but because he could see how deeply the loss would wound Emma. The girl had already endured more sorrow than most children her age, and Rex represented not just companionship but connection to the family she had lost. When the dog's time came, as it inevitably would, Emma would face another devastating goodbye. Joseph found himself watching the pair more closely as the days grew longer, noting the small rituals that bound them together. The way Emma always shared a piece of her lunch with Rex, how the dog positioned himself between the girl and any stranger who approached, the gentle manner in which Emma brushed Rex's coat each evening before helping Martha closed the store. It was during one of these quiet evening observations that Joseph first noticed something unusual, a faint disturbance in the air around Rex, like heat waves rising from sun-baked stone. The shimmer was subtle, visible only when the light struck at a particular angle, and Joseph found himself leaning forward on his bench to get a better look. The phenomenon was familiar, yet unprecedented. Joseph had seen such signs before, but only rarely, and never around an animal so close to the end of its natural life. In Apache tradition, such shimmering indicated a spirit caught between worlds, unable or unwilling to make the journey to whatever lay beyond. It was a sign that demanded attention, though Joseph could not yet understand what it might mean in Rex's case. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, Joseph rose from his bench and walked slowly back into his dwelling. He lit a single candle and sat before his medicine bundle, running his fingers over the soft leather as he had done countless times before. Tonight, however, the familiar ritual carried new weight. Something was coming. Joseph could feel it in the way he had once sensed approaching storms or the presence of game along mountain trails. The signs were gathering, and at the center of it all was a 9-year-old girl who had no idea that her life was about to change in ways that would test everything she thought she knew about the world. The morning came too quickly, arriving with the kind of blazing heat that turned the air thick and still before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. Emma woke to find Rex lying beside her narrow bed, his breathing shallow and labored in a way that made her stomach clench with worry. The dog had seemed tired the evening before, but this was different. Something had changed during the night. "Rex," she whispered, reaching down to touch his graying muzzle. The shepherd's eyes opened at her voice, but the usual spark of alertness was dim, replaced by something that looked almost like apology. He tried to lift his head, but managed only a small movement before settling back onto the wooden floor with a soft whimper. Emma's bare feet hit the cool planks as she knelt beside him, her small hands running over his familiar form. His coat felt different somehow, less warm than usual, and when she pressed her ear to his chest, his heartbeat seemed irregular, like someone tapping out an uncertain rhythm on a distant drum. "Aunt Martha," Emma called, her voice carrying the edge of panic that adults learn to recognize in children. "Something's wrong with Rex." Martha appeared in the doorway, her gray hair already pinned in its customary tight bun despite the early hour. She took one look at the dog and felt her own heart sink, though she tried to keep her expression neutral for Emma's sake. "Let me see, child," Martha said, kneeling beside her niece. She had grown up on a working ranch and had seen enough animals in their final days to recognize the signs. Rex's gums were pale, his breathing shallow, and there was a quality to his stillness that spoke of systems beginning to shut down. "We need to fetch Dr. Hayes," Martha said quietly, though she suspected there would be little a veterinarian could do. Sometimes the body simply decided it was time to rest, regardless of medicine or good intentions. Emma dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she pulled on her simple cotton dress and warm leather shoes. Rex watched her movements, but made no attempt to rise, as if he understood that this morning would be different from all the others that had come before. Dr. Hayes arrived within the hour, his black leather bag in hand and his professional demeanor intact despite being called from his breakfast. He examined Rex with thorough efficiency, checking the dog's heart rate, looking into his eyes, feeling for swelling or obvious signs of injury or disease. "His heart is failing," Dr. Hayes said, finally settling back on his heels with the kind of gravity that Emma immediately understood meant bad news. At his age, with these symptoms, there's not much we can do to reverse the process. I can give him something to make him more comfortable, but what? Emma interrupted, though she could see the answer in the veterinarian's kind but resigned expression. "But we're looking at days, maybe hours," Dr. Hayes said gently. "I'm sorry, Emma. Rex has been a good long-lived dog. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is help them go peacefully, without pain." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She had known this day would come eventually. Rex was old, and she wasn't naive about the natural cycle of life and death, but knowing something in your mind and facing it in reality were two entirely different experiences. "No," she said simply, the word carrying more determination than her 9 years should have been able to muster. "There has to be something else. Some other way." Dr. Hayes exchanged a look with Martha, and Emma caught the silent communication that passed between them. They were already discussing what came next, already planning for a future that didn't include Rex, and the realization made her feel desperate and alone. "Emma, honey," Martha began, her voice gentle but firm, "sometimes we have to accept." I said no. Emma's voice was stronger now, though tears were beginning to track down her cheeks. "I won't let him die. Not yet. Not when I can still see him fighting." It was true. Despite his labored breathing and obvious weakness, Rex was still trying to lift his head when Emma spoke, still responding to her voice with the devotion that had defined their relationship for as long as she could remember. Dr. Hayes prepared a small dose of laudanum, something to ease Rex's obvious discomfort while they made decisions about what came next. As he worked, drawing the medication into a glass syringe, a small crowd began to gather outside Martha's store. Word traveled fast in a town as small as Copper Ridge, and news of Rex's condition had spread among the early risers who were beginning their daily routines. Joseph Crowfeather was among them, though he stood apart from the others, his weathered face thoughtful as he observed the scene through the open doorway. The shimmer he had noticed around Rex the evening before was stronger now, more pronounced, and it seemed to pulse in rhythm with the dog's labored breathing. "Step back, Emma," Dr. Hayes said quietly. "Let me give him this medicine, and then we can talk about what comes next." But as the veterinarian approached Rex with the syringe, Joseph felt something stir deep in his chest, an instinct that had been dormant for so many years he had almost forgotten its voice. The shimmer around Rex wasn't the sign of a spirit preparing to depart. It was something else entirely, something that spoke to knowledge older than modern medicine and more complex than a simple diagnosis of heart failure. "Wait," Joseph said, stepping forward into the doorway. His voice was quiet but carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the small room turn to look at him. Dr. Hayes paused, syringe in hand, and gave Joseph the kind of look that educated men often reserved for those they considered ignorant. "I appreciate your concern, but this is a medical matter. The dog is suffering, and the humane thing—" "I can see something," Joseph interrupted, his eyes fixed on Rex. "Something you cannot see with your instruments." Emma looked up at the old Apache man, and for the first time since she had found Rex in distress, she felt a flicker of hope. There was something in Joseph's weathered face, a certainty that spoke to possibilities she hadn't considered. "What do you see?" she asked, ignoring the sharp look that Martha shot in her direction. Joseph knelt beside Rex, his movements careful and respectful. He didn't touch the dog immediately, but instead held his hands a few inches above the animal's body, as if feeling for something invisible to everyone else in the room. "His spirit is not ready to leave," Joseph said finally. "It is caught between this world and the next, confused by signals that do not match his true condition. What your doctor sees as heart failure, I see as spiritual disruption." Dr. Hayes made a sound of frustrated disbelief. "That's exactly the kind of superstitious nonsense that gets animals and people killed. This dog needs medical attention, not folk remedies and mystical mumbo-jumbo." "Please," Emma said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She looked directly at Joseph, her young face streaked with tears but set with determination. "Can you help him?" Joseph met her gaze and saw something there that made his breath catch a recognition that went deeper than words, a connection that reminded him of another pair of eyes from long ago. In that moment, he understood that this was why he had been shown the sign, why his gift had stirred to life after so many years of dormancy. "I can try," he said simply. Martha stepped forward, her practical nature warring with her love for her niece. "Emma, I don't think. Let him try, Aunt Martha, please." Emma's voice broke on the last word, and the raw desperation in her plea silenced every objection that the adults might have raised. Dr. Hayes lowered his syringe, his expression conflicted. He was a man of science, trained to trust in observable facts and proven treatments. But he was also human enough to recognize the depth of Emma's need, and experienced enough to know that medicine didn't always have all the answers. "If you're going to do something, do it quickly," he said to Joseph, though his tone suggested he expected nothing but disappointment. "This animal is in distress, and if your methods don't show results soon, I'm going to insist on proper treatment." Joseph nodded, accepting the challenge. He placed his hands gently on Rex's chest, closing his eyes and reaching for knowledge that had been passed down through generations of healers. Around him, the small room fell silent except for the dog's labored breathing and the distant sounds of Copperidge beginning another day. For Emma, watching Joseph work over her beloved companion, the world seemed to hold its breath. She didn't understand what the old man was doing, but she could feel something shifting in the air around them, something that spoke to possibilities beyond the grim certainty that Dr. Hayes had offered. Rex's breathing seemed to steady slightly under Joseph's touch, and for the first time since she had awakened to find him in distress, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this story might not end the way everyone expected. Joseph worked with the quiet concentration of a man who had spent decades learning to listen to voices that others could not hear. His weathered hands moved slowly over Rex's body, not quite touching but somehow connected to the dog's failing systems through means that modern medicine would dismiss as impossible. From his medicine bundle, Joseph retrieved a tightly bound bundle of dried sage, the sacred herb wrapped carefully in sinew and aged to the perfect consistency for cleansing negative energy. He had gathered this particular sage himself from the high desert country where his grandfather had first taught him to recognize the plants that could heal both body and spirit. "What is he doing?" Dr. Hayes whispered to Martha, his professional, curiosity warring with his skepticism as he watched Joseph light one end of the sage bundle with a match. "I'm not entirely sure," Martha replied quietly, though she found herself drawn into the ritual despite her practical nature. There was something about Joseph's movements, the careful deliberation with which he performed each action, that spoke to knowledge both ancient and profound. As the sage began to smolder, releasing its clean, pungent scent into the morning air, Joseph began to speak in his native language. The words were musical and rhythmic, carrying meanings that went deeper than simple translation. Emma didn't understand the Apache tongue, but she felt the power in those ancient syllables, the way. They seemed to resonate with something fundamental in the world around them. Rex's breathing began to change. The shallow, labored pants that had marked his distress gradually deepened, becoming more regular and less desperate. His amber eyes, which had been clouded with pain and confusion, seemed to clear slightly as Joseph continued his work. "I'll be damned," Dr. Hayes muttered under his breath, his medical training struggling to explain what he was witnessing. The dog's vital signs were improving in ways that defied rational explanation, and the veterinarian found himself leaning forward to get a better look at what Joseph was doing. Joseph moved the smoking sage bundle in slow, deliberate patterns around Rex's body, paying particular attention to the animal's chest and head. As he worked, he began to speak to Emma in English, his voice low and calm. "Your friend here," Joseph said, never taking his eyes off Rex. "His spirit is confused. Something has frightened it, made it want to flee this world before its proper time. But the body is not ready to let go, and this creates a battle that weakens both." Emma knelt closer, her young face intent with concentration. "What frightened? Him?" Joseph paused in his movements, considering the question. "Sometimes spirits see things that we cannot. Perhaps he sensed danger coming to you. Danger that made him want to protect you by staying close to this world even when his body was telling him it was time to rest. The idea that Rex might be fighting death itself out of loyalty to her maid." Emma's chest tightened with emotion. It was exactly the kind of selfless devotion that had defined their relationship from the beginning, and she could easily believe that her faithful companion would defy the natural order rather than leave her. "Unprotected. Can you help him understand that it's okay?" Emma asked. "That I'll be safe even if he needs to go?" Joseph met her gaze, and once again he was struck by the depth of understanding in eyes too young to possess such wisdom. "That is not the message his spirit needs to hear," he said gently. "What he needs to know is that his time has not yet come, that the danger he senses can be faced and overcome without him sacrificing his own life force." As Joseph continued his work, the small crowd that had gathered outside Martha's store began to press closer to the doorway. Word of the strange healing taking place had spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire, and people were curious to see what the old Apache man could accomplish with his mysterious methods. Sheriff Bradley arrived, his weathered face serious as he assessed the situation. He had dealt with Joseph on several occasions and had learned to respect the man's insights. But this was different from tracking a lost traveler or predicting where rustlers might strike next. This was a matter of life and death, and the lawman understood that the entire town was watching to see whether traditional Apache medicine could succeed where modern veterinary science had declared defeat inevitable. "How's it going?" Bradley asked Martha quietly, nodding toward Joseph and Rex. "Better than I expected," Martha admitted. "Rex seems to be breathing easier, and he's more alert than he was when Dr. Hayes first examined him." The sheriff studied the scene, noting the way Emma remained focused entirely on Joseph's movements, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap as she watched every gesture the medicine man made. There was something about the tableau, the old Apache healer, the dying dog, the desperate child, that reminded Bradley of older stories, legends from a time when such healing was more common and less questioned. Joseph began to explain his methods to Emma, treating her not as a child to be shielded from complex ideas, but as someone capable of understanding the deeper truths he was sharing. "All living things are connected," he told her as he continued to work with the sage. "What affects one creature affects all others, sometimes in ways we cannot see or understand. Your Rex, he is part of a web that includes you, your family, even the land itself. When one thread of that web is disturbed, the whole pattern changes." Emma nodded solemnly, absorbing every word. "So if I'm sad about losing him, that makes him sicker?" "Not exactly," Joseph said, pausing to relight the sage bundle as it began to cool. But strong emotions create ripples, like throwing a stone into still water. Those ripples can reach far beyond what we expect. Dr. Hayes, despite his skepticism, found himself genuinely intrigued by Joseph's approach. The veterinarian had been trained to treat animals as biological machines, complex systems that could be repaired through proper diagnosis and treatment. But Joseph seemed to view Rex as part of something larger, a living being whose health was influenced by factors that medical science didn't acknowledge or measure. "What do you see when you look at him now?" Dr. Hayes asked, setting aside his professional pride in favor of genuine curiosity. Joseph studied Rex carefully, his hands still moving in the slow patterns that seemed to bring the dog comfort. "The shimmer is changing," he said finally. "Before, it was chaotic, pulling in different directions. Now it moves more like water finding its proper channel." To everyone else in the room, Rex looked much the same as he had an hour earlier, an old dog lying on a wooden floor, breathing with obvious difficulty. But even those who couldn't see what Joseph described could observe that the animal's distress had lessened, that there was something more peaceful about his demeanor. Emma reached out tentatively to stroke Rex's head, and for the first time that morning the dog's tail moved in a weak but unmistakable wag. The small gesture sent a wave of relief through the watching crowd, and even Dr. Hayes allowed himself a cautious smile. "Is he going to be all right?" Emma asked, though she seemed afraid to voice the hope that was building in her chest. Joseph continued his work, unwilling to make promises that might not be within his power to keep. "He is fighting," he said simply, "and that is more than he was doing before." By midday, Rex had managed to lift his head and take a few sips of water that Emma offered him in a small wooden bowl. The improvement was subtle but undeniable, and even Dr. Hayes had to admit that something beyond his understanding was taking place. Joseph sat back on his heels, carefully extinguishing the sage bundle and returning it to his medicine bundle. From within the sacred pouch, he withdrew a single eagle feather, its brown and white markings pristine despite its obvious age. The feather had belonged to his grandfather, passed down through generations of healers as a symbol of the connection between earth and sky, between the physical world and the realm of spirits. "This belonged to my grandfather's grandfather," Joseph told Emma as he held the feather gently in his weathered hands. "It carries the wisdom of many healers, and it will help me understand what your Rex needs for complete healing." Emma studied the feather with the reverence it deserved, recognizing instinctively that she was being trusted with something sacred. "What do I need to do?" Joseph smiled at her willingness to participate, seeing in her response the same openness to learning that had marked the greatest healers in his family line. "First, you must understand that healing is not something I do to Rex. It is something we help him do for himself. Your part is to really listen to what he is telling you." "How do I listen to a dog?" Emma asked, though her tone suggested she was ready to learn whatever Joseph was willing to teach. "The same way you listen to the wind or the rain," Joseph replied, "with more than just your ears. Watch how he moves, how he breathes, how he looks at you. Animals speak constantly. Humans have simply forgotten how to understand their language." As if responding to Joseph's words, Rex made a small sound. Quite a whimper, but a soft vocalization that seemed directed specifically at Emma. The girl looked at Joseph questioningly. "What do you think he is saying?" Joseph asked. Emma considered the question seriously, studying Rex's expression and posture. "I think he's telling me he's tired, but he's trying to get better. And maybe that he's grateful we're helping him." Joseph nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, watch this." He held the eagle feather a few inches above Rex's head, moving it slowly back and forth. The dog's eyes followed the movement, and his breathing seemed to synchronize with the feather's gentle motion. "He's relaxing," Emma observed, wonder evident in her voice. "The feather carries the energy of the eagle," Joseph explained. "Eagles see everything from great heights, understand patterns that those on the ground cannot perceive. When Rex watches the feather, he borrows some of that perspective, and it helps him see his situation more clearly. Dr. Hayes, who had been observing from across the room, approached cautiously. Despite his medical training, he found himself genuinely curious about Joseph's methods. "I have to ask," he said quietly, "how do you know these techniques work?" Joseph considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "The same way you know that your medicines work. Through observation, experience, and the wisdom passed down by those who came before us. My grandfather taught me, as his grandfather taught him. Each generation adds to the knowledge, but the foundation remains the same." "But you can't measure what you're doing," Dr. Hayes protested gently. "There's no way to quantify the results or understand the mechanism." "Cannot you measure the improvement in Rex's breathing?" Joseph asked. "Can you not see that his eyes are clearer now than they were this morning?" "Sometimes the evidence is in the results, not in the explanation of how those results were achieved." The veterinarian fell silent, recognizing the wisdom in Joseph's words. Medical science was built on the foundation of observation, after all. And what he was observing defied his training but was undeniably real. As the afternoon wore on, Joseph began to share stories from his own past, weaving together the threads of memory and teaching in the way that had preserved Apache knowledge for countless generations. He spoke of his grandfather, a medicine man whose reputation for healing had stretched across 3 territories, and of the lessons learned during long walks through desert country, where every plant and animal had something to teach those willing to learn. "I was about your age," Joseph told Emma as he continued to work with Rex, "when my grandfather first showed me how to see the shimmer around living things. I thought he was making up stories to entertain a restless boy. What changed your mind?" Emma asked. Joseph's weathered face grew thoughtful as he remembered. "A horse. My family's best Mari had been injured in a fall, and everyone believed she would need to be put down. But my grandfather saw the same kind of shimmer around her that I now see. Around Rex, a sign that her spirit was not ready to depart." "Did he save her?" "We saved her," Joseph corrected gently. "Healing is never the work of one person alone. My grandfather provided the knowledge and experience, but the horse herself did the actual healing. And I learned that day that sometimes the most important medicine is simply believing that healing is possible." Emma absorbed this lesson, understanding that Joseph was teaching her something far more valuable than just how to help Rex recover. He was showing her how to participate in the ancient dance between healer and patient, between hope and reality, between the world of spirits and the physical realm. Rex continued to improve throughout the afternoon. His breathing became steadier, his eyes brighter, and he even managed to eat a small portion of the food that Emma offered him. The change was remarkable enough that several townspeople stopped by Martha's store to witness what they were already calling a miracle. Martha herself found her attitude toward Joseph shifting as she watched him work with Rex and teach Emma. She had always seen the old Apache man as harmless but irrelevant, a relic from an earlier time that had little to offer the modern world. Now she began to understand that Joseph possessed knowledge that complemented rather than competed with more conventional approaches to healing. "I owe you an apology," she told Joseph quietly as the day began to wind toward evening. "I didn't believe you could help Rex, and I was wrong." Joseph accepted her words with characteristic grace. "There is no shame in skepticism," he replied. "Wisdom often comes disguised as foolishness, and it is natural to question what we do not understand." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold, Emma sat beside Rex and gently stroked his graying fur. The dog's improvement had been steady throughout the day, and for the first time since she had found him in distress that morning, she allowed herself to believe that he might actually recover. "Will you teach me more?" she asked Joseph as he prepared to pack his medicine bundle for the night. Joseph looked at the earnest young face turned up toward him and saw something that took his breath away. A hunger for knowledge that reminded him powerfully of another child from long ago. Another set of eyes that had looked at him with the same mixture of curiosity and trust. "If you truly wish to learn," he said carefully, "then yes, I will teach you what I can." The next morning brought both hope and setback in equal measure. Rex had survived the night, which Dr. Hayes privately admitted was more than he had expected. But the dog's improvement seemed to have stalled. He could lift his head and take water. But the spark of life that had flickered so promisingly the day before appeared dimmed again. Emma found Joseph sitting on his wooden bench outside his dwelling, a hand-carved wooden bowl in his lap as he prepared a mixture of dried herbs with the patient precision of someone who understood that healing could not be rushed. "He's not getting better fast enough," Emma said, the worry evident in her young voice. "What if we're not doing enough?" Joseph looked up from his work, studying Emma's face with the same careful attention he gave to his healing preparations. "Healing is not a straight line," he said gently. "It moves in circles and spirals, sometimes appearing to go backward before moving forward again. This is natural, especially when the healing involves not just the body, but the spirit as well." He gestured for Emma to sit beside him on the bench, then showed her the contents of the wooden bowl. Inside were dried leaves and roots of various colors and textures, each carefully measured and combined according to knowledge passed down through generations. "These plants," Joseph explained, "they grow slowly in difficult places. They must survive drought and wind, cold nights, and blazing days. The power to heal comes not from forcing rapid growth, but from developing deep roots and learning to endure." Emma studied the mixture, recognizing some of the plants from her walks around Copper Ridge, but understanding for the first time that they possess properties beyond simple beauty or curiosity. "Will this make Rex feel better?" "It will help his body remember how to heal itself," Joseph said, adding a small amount of water to the bowl and beginning to grind the mixture with a smooth stone pestle. "But the most important medicine is what you are already giving him, your love and your belief that he can recover." As they worked together preparing the herbal remedy, Joseph began to teach Emma about the plants themselves. He showed her how to identify willow bark by its bitter scent and explained how it could reduce pain and inflammation. He demonstrated the difference between beneficial and harmful varieties of sage, pointing out subtle differences in leaf shape and color that could mean the difference between healing and harm. "My grandfather always said that the land itself is the greatest teacher," Joseph told her as they walked toward Martha's store. "Every plant has something to offer, but only if we approach it with respect and understanding." When they arrived at the store, they found Dr. Hayes examining Rex again, his expression troubled as he noted the dog's lack of progress. "I'm concerned," he told Martha quietly. "Yesterday's improvement seems to have reversed, and I'm seeing signs that suggest his condition may be deteriorating again." Joseph knelt beside Rex and placed his hand gently on the dog's chest, feeling for the energy patterns that only he could perceive. The shimmer was still there, but it had changed again, becoming more agitated and uncertain. "Something is frightening him," Joseph said after a long moment of concentration. "Not a physical threat, but something in the spirit realm that we cannot see." Emma immediately knelt beside Joseph, her small hand joining his on Rex's warm fur. "What kind of something?" Joseph closed his eyes, reaching deeper into the knowledge his grandfather had taught him about the unseen world that existed alongside the physical realm. Sometimes, when an animal is very sick, other spirits try to convince it to give up and join them. They are not evil, but they do not understand the bonds that keep a soul connected to this world. "Can't we tell them to go away?" Emma asked with the practical directness of childhood. "We can," Joseph said, opening his eyes and meeting her gaze. "But it requires both of us working together. and you must be willing to share some of your own life force with Rex to strengthen his connection to this world. Dr. Hayes started to object, concerned about what he saw as potentially dangerous nonsense, but Martha placed a restraining hand on his arm. She had seen enough improvement in Rex to believe that Joseph's methods, however unconventional, were having a positive effect. "What do I need to do?" Emma asked without hesitation. Joseph smiled at her courage, reminded once again of someone from his past whose memory stirred just beyond the reach of conscious recollection. "First, we must prepare properly. This kind of healing is more demanding than what we did yesterday, and it requires certain protections." He began to arrange items from his medicine bundle in a careful pattern around Rex's resting place. A small piece of turquoise, worn smooth by generations of handling, was placed over the dog's heart. Feathers from different birds, eagle, hawk, and raven, were positioned at specific points that corresponded to what Joseph explained were energy centers in Rex's body. "Each of these items carries power," Joseph told Emma as he worked. "The turquoise helps energy flow smoothly through the body. The eagle feather connects us to the sky spirits who can see the larger pattern. The hawk feather brings clarity and focus, while the raven feather provides protection from negative influences." Emma watched every movement with intense concentration, committing each detail to memory. She could sense that she was being initiated into knowledge that few people ever had the privilege to learn, and she understood instinctively that such knowledge came with both power and responsibility. As Joseph completed his preparations, a small crowd began to gather once again outside Martha's store. Word of Rex's continued struggle had spread through Copper Ridge, and people were curious to see whether the old Apache man's medicine would prove strong enough to overcome whatever forces were working against the dog's recovery. Sheriff Bradley arrived just as Joseph was beginning the more intensive healing ceremony. The lawman had dealt with enough unusual situations in his career to maintain an open mind about things that couldn't be easily explained, and he positioned himself where he could observe without interfering. "I want you to place your hands here," Joseph instructed Emma, guiding her small palms to rest on either side of the turquoise stone. "Feel the warmth of his heart, and imagine that warmth flowing from your hands into his body." Emma closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to sense the connection that Joseph described. At first, she felt only the familiar texture of Rex's fur and the steady rhythm of his breathing. But gradually, she began to perceive something else, a faint sense of energy or life force that seemed to pulse beneath her hands. "I can feel something," she whispered, her eyes still closed in concentration. "Good," Joseph said quietly. "Now, hold that feeling and let it grow stronger. Imagine a warm, golden light flowing from your heart through your hands and into Rex's body." As Emma followed Joseph's instructions, something remarkable began to happen. The turquoise stone seemed to grow warmer beneath her touch, and Rex's breathing became noticeably deeper and more regular. Even Dr. Hayes, watching with professional skepticism, had to admit that the dog's vital signs were improving in ways that defied medical explanation. But Joseph could see something that the others could not. The shimmer around Rex was beginning to stabilize, the chaotic energy patterns settling into something more harmonious and purposeful. Whatever had been frightening the dog's spirit was being held at bay by the combined power of the ceremony and Emma's natural gift for healing. 3 days had passed since Joseph first intervened to help Rex, and the dog's condition had become a source of intense discussion throughout Copper Ridge. While he had shown remarkable improvement during the healing ceremonies, his progress remained frustratingly inconsistent. Some mornings, he seemed almost healthy, able to stand and walk short distances. Other days, like this one, he barely lifted his head from his resting place. Emma sat beside Rex in the back room of Martha's store, a small turquoise stone in her palm as Joseph had taught her. The stone was supposed to help her focus her healing energy, but today it felt cold and lifeless against her skin. Doubt was creeping into her thoughts like a persistent shadow, whispering that maybe Dr. Hayes had been right from the beginning. "I don't think I'm helping him anymore," Emma confided to Joseph when he arrived for the morning healing session. "Yesterday he seemed so much better, but today he won't even look at me." Joseph studied both Emma and Rex with the careful attention that had become his trademark. The turquoise stone over Rex's heart still glowed with subtle energy, but the patterns were more chaotic now, swirling with currents that spoke of deep spiritual confusion. "The healing is harder now because we are approaching the most difficult part," Joseph explained as he arranged his materials. "Rex's spirit must make a choice between two worlds, and that choice cannot be made for him." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, though part of her already understood the implications of Joseph's words. "He loves you very much," Joseph said gently. "So much that he is willing to fight against the natural order of things to stay with you. But this creates a conflict within him that grows stronger each day." Dr. Hayes, who had taken to observing Joseph's methods with grudging fascination, looked up from his notes. "Are you saying the dog is torn between living and dying?" "I am saying that love sometimes creates its own kind of suffering," Joseph replied. "Rex knows that his body is failing, but his heart refuses to accept what his spirit already understands." Emma felt tears sting her eyes as she began to grasp what Joseph was telling her. "So it's my fault? Because I won't let him go?" "No, child," Joseph said firmly, reaching out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Love is never a fault. But sometimes the greatest act of love is learning when to hold on and when to let go." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several townspeople who had come to check on Rex's progress. Over the past few days, the dog's struggle had become a symbol of something larger for the community, a test of whether old ways and new ways could work together, whether faith and science could find common ground. Frank Morrison, the saloon owner, removed his hat as he entered the store. "How's the old boy doing today?" he asked quietly, his usual gruffness tempered by genuine concern. "Some better, some worse," Martha replied honestly. "Joseph says it's normal for healing to come in waves." Mrs. Wells, the schoolteacher, had brought a small group of her students to see Rex. The children stood in respectful silence, watching as Joseph prepared for another healing session. Emma noticed how the other children looked at her with a mixture of awe and curiosity, as if her participation in Rex's healing had set her apart from them in some fundamental way. "Can we help too?" asked Billy Patterson, one of the older boys in the class. Joseph considered the question thoughtfully. "Healing works best when many hearts join together with a single purpose," he said finally. "If you would like to help, you can sit quietly and send good thoughts to Rex." As the children arranged themselves in a circle around Rex's resting place, Joseph began to work with the turquoise stone, moving it in slow patterns over the dog's body while chanting softly. In Apache, Emma joined her energy to his, feeling the familiar warmth flow from her hands as she had been taught. But today, something was different. The energy felt heavier, more difficult to maintain, and Emma found herself struggling to keep the connection stable. Rex's breathing remained labored, and the spark in his amber eyes seemed dimmer than it had been in days. "He's fighting something we can't see," Joseph murmured, his weathered face creased with concentration. "Something that wants him to give up hope." Emma closed her eyes and reached deeper into the healing energy, trying to strengthen her connection to Rex's spirit. As she did, she began to experience something unprecedented visions that seemed to come from outside her own mind. She saw Rex as a young dog, running through tall grass beside a man who looked like her father, but somehow wasn't quite right. She saw him protecting a woman and child during a terrible storm, standing guard through a long, frightening night. And she saw him making a promise, though she couldn't understand to whom or what that promise might entail. "Joseph," Emma whispered, her eyes still closed. I think I'm seeing things. Rex's memories, maybe. Joseph's chanting paused for a moment. What do you see? He's protecting people. Different people, but always protecting them, like it's what he was born to do. Understanding dawned in Joseph's weathered features. He is a guardian spirit, he said quietly. That is why his soul fights so hard against leaving this world. He believes his work is not finished. Dr. Hayes leaned forward, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was hearing. You're saying this dog has some kind of spiritual mission? I am saying that some souls choose to serve, Joseph replied. They return again and again, taking different forms, but always working to protect those who need protection. Emma opened her eyes, and for the first time since the healing began, she felt she truly understood what Rex needed from her. He needs to know that I'll be safe without him, she said with sudden clarity. That's what's keeping him trapped between worlds. Joseph nodded approvingly. And how do you think we can give him that knowledge? Emma looked around the room at the faces of the townspeople who had gathered to support Rex's healing. She saw Mrs. Wells and her students, Sheriff Bradley, Frank, Morrison, even Dr. Hayes with his medical bag and skeptical expression. She saw Martha, who had become more protective and caring over the past few days than Emma had ever experienced before. We show him that I'm not alone, Emma said simply. That there are other people who will help take care of me. It was a mature insight from someone so young, and Joseph felt a familiar stirring of memory as he watched. Emma organized the other children into a more formal circle around Rex. There was something about her natural leadership, her instinctive understanding of what needed to be done, that reminded him powerfully of someone from his past dot as the healing session continued with the entire community participating. Joseph found himself studying Emma's profile and wondering why she seemed so familiar. The way she tilted her head when concentrating, the gentle authority in her voice when she spoke to the other. Children, these things triggered memories that he couldn't quite bring into focus. Rex's breathing began to stabilize as the combined energy of the group flowed around him. But Joseph could sense that the real test was still to come. The dog's spirit would need to make its final choice soon, and that choice would depend on whether Emma could truly demonstrate that she understood the difference between love that holds on and love that lets go. That evening, as the community healing session came to an end and the townspeople began to disperse, Joseph found himself alone with Martha in the store's back room. Emma had fallen asleep beside Rex, exhausted by the spiritual effort she had expended throughout the day. The dog was resting more peacefully than he had in days, his breathing steady and his eyes clear. Martha was organizing the items the people had brought for Emma and Rex food. Blankets, small tokens of support from neighbors who had been touched by the girl's dedication to her companion. As she worked, she pulled out a small wooden box that had belonged to Emma's mother. I've been meaning to go through Charlotte's things more thoroughly, Martha said quietly, not wanting to wake Emma. There are items in here that Emma should have when she's older, but I thought there might be something that could comfort her. Now, Joseph helped Martha examine the contents of the box, noting the careful way she handled each item as if it were made of precious crystal. There were letters tied with ribbon, a few pieces of simple jewelry, and a small leather journal filled with Charlotte's handwriting dot at the bottom of the box. Wrapped in a piece of soft cloth was an old daguerreotype photograph that made Joseph's breath catch in his throat. The image was faded but clear enough to show a young white woman standing beside an Apache man in traditional dress. Between them stood a little girl who looked remarkably like Emma. Where did this come from? Joseph asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Martha looked at the photograph more closely, seeing details she had missed during her previous cursory examination of Charlotte's belongings. I don't know, she admitted. Charlotte never talked much about her past, especially her childhood. I always assumed she grew up back east somewhere. Joseph studied the image with growing amazement. recognizing features that had haunted his dreams for nearly 30 years. The Apache man in the photograph was his own younger self, and the woman beside him was someone he had loved and lost during the turbulent years when his people were struggling to find their place in a changing world. This woman, Joseph said. Carefully, what was her name before she married Emma's father? Charlotte Windwalker, Martha replied. She said her father was a trader who worked with various tribes. Why do you ask? The name hit Joseph like a physical blow, confirming what he had already begun to suspect. Charlotte Windwalker had been Star Who Dances, the daughter of a white trader and an Apache woman, raised in both worlds but belonging fully to neither. She had been Joseph's first student, the one person who had shown a natural gift for healing that rivaled his own, and she had been the love of his life. Star Who Dances, Joseph whispered, the Apache name falling from his lips like a prayer. I knew her as Star Who Dances. Martha stared at him in shock, beginning to understand the implications of what he was telling her. You knew Emma's mother? Joseph nodded slowly, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held the photograph. I trained her in the healing arts when she was just a few years older than Emma is now. She had gifts that I have never seen equaled. An ability to see and work with spiritual energy that was truly extraordinary. The revelation explained so much Emma's natural sensitivity to the spirit world, her instinctive understanding of healing concepts that should have been foreign to someone her age, the familiar quality that had puzzled Joseph from their first meeting. What happened to her? Martha asked gently. Why did she leave? Joseph's expression grew distant as he remembered events that had shaped the course of his entire life. There was trouble between the tribes and the settlers, violence that claimed many lives on both sides. Star Who Dances was caught in the middle because of her mixed heritage. Some of my people saw her as too white, while some of the white settlers saw her as too Apache. He paused, lost in memories that were both precious and painful. I was young and foolish then, convinced that love could overcome any obstacle. I asked her to stay with me, to continue learning the old ways and eventually become a medicine woman for our people. But she was afraid that our relationship would bring more trouble to everyone we cared about. So she left, Martha said, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. She left, Joseph confirmed, and I never saw her again, though I heard years later that she had married a white rancher named Patterson and taken his name. I assumed she had chosen to leave the Apache world behind entirely. Martha looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully beside Rex, and felt a profound sense of destiny at work. She must have known you were here in Copper Ridge. That's why she sent Emma to live with me, instead of with her husband's family. Joseph nodded thoughtfully. Star Who Dances always could see patterns that others missed. She must have known that Emma would inherit her gifts and would need someone who could guide her in their proper use. The implications of this discovery were staggering. Emma wasn't just a white child with an unusual sensitivity to animals. She was the daughter of one of the most gifted healers Joseph had ever known, carrying within her the potential to bridge two worlds, just as her mother had done. Does Emma know about her heritage? Joseph asked. Nothing, Martha said firmly. Charlotte made me promise never to tell her about the Apache side of her family. She said it would only make Emma's life more difficult. Joseph studied the sleeping girl, seeing now the subtle features that marked her mixed heritage. The slight upturn of her eyes, the strong line of her jaw, the way she held herself with unconscious dignity, even in sleep. She has a right to know who she is, he said quietly. But Charlotte was probably right about the difficulties it would cause, Martha replied. You know how some people in this town feel about mixed-blood children. Joseph considered this, understanding Martha's concern, but feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Emma had inherited not just her mother's healing gifts, but also her mother's burden of existing between two worlds. And, just as he had failed to guide Star Who Dances through the challenges of that existence, he now had a chance to help her daughter navigate the same treacherous waters. "The healing she has been doing with Rex," Joseph said slowly, "it is far beyond what any white child should be capable of. Her gifts are strong enough that they will manifest whether we acknowledge them or not. Better that she understands what she possesses and learns to use it wisely." As if responding to the sound of their conversation, Emma stirred in her sleep, her hand automatically reaching out to rest on Rex's head. The dog's tail moved in a sleepy wag, and Joseph could see that the spiritual connection between girl and animal had deepened over the past few days into something that transcended the ordinary bond between human and pet. "She is already walking the path her mother chose to abandon," Joseph observed. "The question is whether we will help her or leave her to figure it out alone." Martha looked at the photograph again, studying the faces of Joseph and Charlotte as young people, seeing in their expressions the hope and love that had been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. "What do you think Charlotte would want us to do?" Joseph smiled sadly, remembering the woman who had stolen his heart so many years ago. Star Who Dances always believed that truth was better than comfortable lies, even when that truth was difficult to bear. She would want Emma to know who she is and where her gifts come from. Rex stirred beneath Emma's hand, his amber eyes opening to fix on Joseph with an intensity that seemed almost human. In that gaze, Joseph saw a recognition not just of him as a healer, but of the deeper connection that now bound them all together through the legacy of Star Who Dances. "Rex knows," Joseph said quietly. "He has been protecting Emma, not just because he loves her, but because he recognizes what she carries within her. He is a guardian spirit, and she is exactly the kind of person such spirits are called to protect." The revelation changed everything about Rex's condition and his struggle between worlds. He wasn't fighting death out of simple attachment to Emma. He was fighting it because he recognized her as someone whose destiny required protection, someone whose gifts would be needed in the difficult times ahead. And Joseph finally understood why his own healing abilities had stirred to life after so many years of dormancy. The spirits had brought him to Copper Ridge, not by accident, but by design, placing him exactly where he would be needed when Star Who Dance's daughter required a teacher and guide. Emma's eyes opened slowly, and she looked up at Joseph with the same direct gaze that had characterized her mother. "I had a dream about my mother," she said simply. "She was teaching someone how to heal with light." Joseph and Martha exchanged a meaningful look, understanding that the time for secrets was rapidly coming to an end. Joseph made the decision to tell Emma the truth about her heritage the following morning, as the first light of dawn painted the desert sky in shades of rose and gold. He had spent the entire night in meditation, seeking guidance from his ancestors about the best way to share knowledge that would forever change how the girl saw herself and her place in the world. Emma arrived at his dwelling just after sunrise, as had become her custom over the past week. Rex walked beside her, moving more easily than he had in days but still requiring frequent rest stops. The dog's improvement continued to confound Dr. Hayes, who had begun keeping detailed notes about the case for future reference. "I need to tell you something important about your mother," Joseph said without preamble, gesturing for Emma to sit beside him on the wooden bench. "Something that will help you understand why you have such strong gifts for healing." Emma settled beside him, her young face serious and attentive. "Is it something bad?" "Not bad," Joseph assured her. "But it is something that will change how you see yourself, and you must be prepared for that change." He showed her the daguerreotype that Martha had discovered among her mother's belongings, watching Emma's eyes widen as she studied the faded image. "This is your mother when she was young, and this," he pointed to his own younger self in the photograph, "is me." Emma examined the picture more closely, seeing the unmistakable resemblance between herself and the little girl standing between the two adults. "You knew my mother?" "I trained her in the healing arts," Joseph said simply. "She was Apache, like me. Mixed blood, but Apache in all the ways that mattered. Her Apache name was Star Who Dances, and she had gifts for healing that I have never seen equaled." The revelation hit Emma like a physical force, reshaping everything she thought she knew about herself and her family. "I'm Apache?" "Part Apache," Joseph confirmed. "And that is why you can see and do things that other children cannot. The gifts you have been using to help Rex, they come from your mother's people, passed down through generations of healers." Emma sat in stunned silence for several long moments, processing this information and all its implications. Finally, she looked up at Joseph with eyes that seemed older than her years. "Is that why Rex got sick? So I would find out who I really am?" Joseph smiled at her perceptiveness, recognizing the same intuitive understanding that had made her mother such an exceptional student. "The spirits work in mysterious ways," he said. "Perhaps Rex's illness was meant to bring us together so that you could learn about your heritage. Or perhaps you were meant to help him because his own spirit recognized what you carry within you." "What happens now?" Emma asked, though her tone suggested she already understood that her life was about to change dramatically. "Now you must decide," Joseph said seriously. "You can continue to live as you have been, keeping your gifts hidden and pretending to be someone you are not. Or you can embrace who you truly are and learn to use your abilities to help others." Emma looked down at Rex, who had settled at her feet with his usual protective devotion. The dog's amber eyes seemed to glow with approval as he met her gaze. And she understood that he had been waiting for this moment as much as anyone. "I want to learn," Emma said with quiet determination. "I want to be like my mother." Joseph felt a surge of pride and sorrow at her words, remembering another young woman who had made a similar choice so many years ago. "Learning the old ways is not easy," he warned. "There will be people who do not understand or approve of what you are doing. You will face challenges that most children never have to confront." "I don't care," Emma said firmly. "If it helps me save Rex and maybe help other animals too, then I want to do it." Joseph nodded approvingly, then rose from the bench and went into his dwelling. When he returned, he carried a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin, his grandfather's sacred pipe, an artifact of such spiritual significance that he had not used it in over 15 years. "This belonged to my grandfather and his grandfather before him," Joseph told Emma as he carefully unwrapped the pipe. "It has been used in the most important healing ceremonies for over 100 years. If we are going to attempt what I believe Rex needs, we will need all the power this pipe can provide." Emma studied the pipe with appropriate reverence, understanding instinctively that she was looking at something sacred. The bowl was carved from red stone and decorated with intricate symbols that seemed to tell a story of their own. The stem was made from a single piece of wood, polished smooth by countless hands and darkened with age. "What kind of ceremony?" Emma asked. "A spirit journey," Joseph said solemnly. "Rex's soul is caught between this world and the next, confused by conflicting loyalties and desires. To heal him completely, we must help his spirit find its proper path. But this kind of ceremony is dangerous. It requires the healer to enter the spirit world alongside the patient." Emma absorbed this information with the same calm acceptance she had shown throughout Rex's illness. "Will you come with me?" "We will go together," Joseph confirmed. "But you must understand that once we begin this ceremony, we cannot stop until it is finished. And there is always the possibility that we might not return." The gravity of what Joseph was proposing began to sink in. Emma would be risking not just her physical safety, but her very soul to save Rex. It was the kind of choice that tested the depth of love and commitment, the ultimate expression of the bond between human and animal. "When do we do it?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Tonight, when the moon is full," Joseph replied. "The spirits are more active during the full moon, which makes the ceremony more powerful but also more dangerous." As word spread through Copper Ridge that Joseph was planning a major healing ceremony for Rex, the entire town seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Some residents were skeptical, viewing the whole affair as elaborate superstition. Others were genuinely hopeful that the old Apache man's medicine might accomplish what modern veterinary science could not. Dr. Hayes found himself torn between professional skepticism and grudging admiration for what Joseph had already accomplished. Rex's improvement over the past week had been undeniable, even if the mechanisms behind that improvement remained mysterious. The veterinarian had begun to suspect that there were aspects of healing that his medical training had never addressed. Martha spent the day in quiet preparation, understanding that the evening ceremony would likely determine not just Rex's fate but Emma's future as well. If the healing succeeded, it would validate Emma's Apache heritage and her gifts in ways that could not be ignored or dismissed. If it failed, the consequences might be devastating for everyone involved. Sheriff Bradley made sure that the area around Martha's store would be kept clear of disruptive onlookers, recognizing that whatever Joseph was planning would require concentration and respect. The lawman had seen enough in his years on the frontier to keep an open mind about things that couldn't be easily explained. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Joseph spent time in solitary meditation, preparing his mind and spirit for the challenging work ahead. He had performed spirit journeys before, but never with someone so young and inexperienced as Emma. The responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders, especially given his knowledge of who Emma truly was and what she represented. Emma, meanwhile, found herself drawn to spend quiet time with Rex, as if she understood that this might be their last peaceful moments together, regardless of how the ceremony unfolded. She brushed his coat with gentle strokes, speaking to him in soft murmurs about her hopes and fears for the night ahead. "I don't know exactly what's going to happen," she told the dog as she worked, "but I want you to know that whatever does happen, I love you enough to risk everything to help you get better." Rex seemed to understand the importance of what she was telling him. He pressed his graying muzzle against her hand and looked up at her with eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. In that moment, Emma felt a connection to him that transcended the ordinary bonds between human and animal. Soul-deep recognition that they were linked by forces larger than either of them could fully comprehend. As the moon began to rise above the eastern horizon, casting silver light across the desert landscape, Joseph emerged from his dwelling carrying the sacred pipe and a leather pouch containing items that would be needed for the ceremony. His weathered face was painted with traditional designs in white clay, marking him as a medicine man preparing for sacred work. Emma met him outside Martha's store, her own face serious but unafraid. She had changed into a simple white dress that Martha had provided, understanding somehow that the ceremony required clean, uncomplicated clothing. "Are you ready?" Joseph asked, though he could see the answer in her steady gaze. "I'm ready," Emma replied, reaching down to rest her hand on Rex's head. "We're both ready." Joseph nodded and began to arrange the items needed for the ceremony, creating a sacred space that would serve as the doorway between the physical world and the realm of spirits. As he worked, a crowd of townspeople gathered at a respectful distance, understanding that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The stage was set for the most important healing of Joseph's long career, and possibly the most dangerous spiritual journey that anyone in Copper Ridge had ever attempted. Everything that had led to this moment, Rex's illness, Emma's discovery of her gifts, the revelation of her Apache heritage, had been building toward this single night, when the boundary between worlds would be crossed in the name of love and healing. The sacred ceremony began as the full moon reached its zenith, bathing Copper Ridge in ethereal silver light that seemed to make the very air shimmer with possibility. Joseph had arranged items from Emma's mother's belongings around Rex's resting. Place a spirit bundle containing personal effects that would help channel Charlotte's presence during the healing. The spirit bundle was carefully constructed from a small piece of Charlotte's favorite shawl, wrapped around the lock of her hair, that Martha had saved, along with a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to Emma's grandmother. Joseph handled each item with reverence, understanding that these physical connections to Star Who Dances would serve as conduits for her spirit's guidance. "Your mother's spirit will guide us," Joseph told Emma as he lit the sacred pipe with practiced reverence. Star Who Dances knew this path well, and she will not let her daughter walk it alone. Emma knelt beside Rex, placing her small hands on the spirit bundle that Joseph had created from her mother's belongings. The moment her fingers touched the soft fabric wrapping, she felt a surge of energy unlike anything she had experienced before, warm, familiar, and infinitely comforting. It was as if her mother's arms were reaching across the boundary between worlds to embrace her. "I can feel her," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face as the connection to her mother's spirit grew stronger. "She's here with us. She's been waiting for this moment." Joseph began to chant in the ancient Apache tongue, his voice carrying across the quiet town as the sacred pipe smoke rose toward the star-filled sky. The words were prayers passed down through generations, calling upon the spirits of the ancestors to witness and assist in the healing ceremony about to unfold. The townspeople who had gathered to witness the ceremony stood in respectful silence, understanding that they were observing something far beyond their normal experience. Even the most skeptical among them could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that forces greater than human understanding were at work in the silver darkness. Rex's breathing began to change as the ceremony intensified. His eyes grew brighter, more alert, as if he was awakening from a deep sleep that had lasted far too long. The spiritual energy flowing between Emma, Joseph, and the spirit bundle seemed to envelop the dog in a cocoon of healing light that was visible only to those with the gift to see it. Dr. Hayes watched from the edge of the crowd, his medical training warring with the evidence of his own eyes. Rex's vital signs were improving in ways that defied scientific explanation, and the veterinarian found himself wondering if there were aspects of healing that his education had never addressed. The dog's pulse was growing stronger, his breathing deeper and more regular. Martha stood nearby, her practical nature struggling to comprehend what she was witnessing. But as she watched her niece work with Joseph, she began to understand that Emma was participating in something that connected her to a heritage that ran deeper than blood, a legacy of healing and wisdom that had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. As Joseph's chanting reached a crescendo, Emma felt herself being drawn into a trance-like state, where the boundaries between physical and spiritual reality became fluid. She could see Rex's spirit, a magnificent, glowing version of the dog she loved, standing beside his physical body as if preparing for a journey to an unknown destination. The spirit realm appeared to Emma as a vast landscape of shifting light and shadow, where the normal rules of physics held no sway. She could see other spirits moving in the distance, some human, some animal, all connected by threads of energy that pulsed with the rhythm of universal heartbeat. "He's deciding," Emma said softly, her eyes still closed as she maintained her connection to the spirit world. "He wants to stay with me, but he knows his body is tired. He's asking the spirits what he should do." Joseph's weathered hands moved in complex patterns around the spirit bundle, weaving together energies from past and present as he called upon all his knowledge and experience. The sacred pipe glowed with inner fire, its smoke forming shapes that seemed to dance with purpose in the moonlit air. Eagles soaring, wolves running, spirits of the ancestors watching over the ceremony with ancient eyes. Through the spirit bundle, Emma could feel her mother's presence growing stronger, offering guidance and protection as the ceremony reached its most critical phase. Charlotte's love surrounded her daughter like a warm embrace, providing the strength and courage needed for what lay ahead. Emma could almost hear her mother's voice, speaking words of encouragement and wisdom. "She's telling me something," Emma said, her voice distant as she listened to communications that existed beyond ordinary sound. "She says Rex has been waiting for me to grow strong enough to make this choice with him. That he's been holding on not just because he loves me, but because he knew I would need to learn who I really am." Rex's spirit turned to look directly at Emma, and in that gaze she saw a depth of love and loyalty that took her breath away. But more than that, she saw understanding recognition that she had grown beyond the frightened little girl who had first found him sick and dying. He was asking for her permission not to live or die, but to choose freely without the burden of her desperate need to keep him with her dot. The townspeople watched in amazement as Rex suddenly lifted his head higher than he had in days, his amber eyes bright with renewed vitality. The healing energy flowing through the ceremony had given him the strength to participate fully in his own spiritual decision, to be a conscious partner in determining his fate. Emma leaned down to whisper in Rex's ear, words meant only for him, as she released him from the burden of her desperate love. "Whatever you choose, I'll understand. You've already given me more than any girl could ask for. You helped me find my mother, and you helped me find myself." Joseph felt the spiritual energies shifting around them, the chaotic patterns that had plagued Rex's aura finally beginning to settle into something more harmonious. The ceremony was working, but the most challenging part still lay ahead, helping Rex's spirit find its proper path regardless of which choice he made. In the sacred space between heartbeats, Rex made his choice. Emma felt the exact moment when his spirit decided to return fully to his physical body, drawn not by her desperate need, but by his own recognition of purpose, yet unfulfilled. The decision rippled through the spiritual realm like a stone dropped into still water, sending waves of healing energy flowing through every cell of his aging form. The transformation was immediate and miraculous. Rex's breathing deepened and strengthened. His eyes cleared of the confusion that had clouded them for days, and his body seemed to fill with renewed vitality. Emma watched in wonder as the spirit bundle in her hands grew warm, pulsing with energy that felt like her mother's heartbeat. "He's coming back," Emma whispered, her voice filled with awe as she witnessed Rex's spirit merging completely with his physical form. "He's choosing to stay." Joseph continued his chanting, but his voice now carried notes of triumph and gratitude, as he guided Rex's spirit through the final stages of its healing journey. The sacred pipe smoke swirled around them in patterns that seemed to tell a story of renewal and hope, visible manifestations of the spiritual forces at work. But Emma's role in the ceremony was far from over. As Rex's healing progressed, she felt her own energy being drawn into the process, her life force flowing through the spirit bundle to strengthen the connection between her companion's body and soul. The effort was exhausting, demanding more of her than she had known she possessed. "Emma," Joseph said urgently, seeing the strain the ceremony was placing on her young body, "you must be careful not to give too much of yourself. Rex needs you to stay strong." Martha stepped forward from the crowd, her face etched with worry as she watched her niece pour her life energy into saving Rex. "Is she going to be all right?" "She is stronger than she knows," Joseph replied, though he kept a careful watch on Emma's vital signs as the ceremony continued. Star Who Dance's daughter carries the same power that made her mother a legendary healer. Emma felt herself being drawn deeper into the spiritual realm, where she could see not just Rex's healing, but the larger pattern of which it was a part. She saw the connections that bound all living things together, the web of energy that Joseph had described during their first lessons. And she understood, with a clarity that transcended her 9 years, that healing was never about one person or one animal. It was about restoring balance to the entire Community. Rex struggled to his feet, his movement stronger and more purposeful than it had been in weeks. The crowd gasped in amazement as the dog who had been dying just hours earlier began to walk normally, his tail wagging with genuine enthusiasm for the first time since his illness began. Dr. Hayes shook his head in disbelief, watching as Rex demonstrated vitality that his medical examination had declared impossible. "This defies everything I know about veterinary medicine," he admitted to Sheriff Bradley. "Maybe that's the point," the lawman replied quietly. "Maybe there are some things that can't be learned from books." As the ceremony reached its conclusion, Emma felt her mother's presence beginning to fade, but not before Charlotte's spirit imparted one final gift knowledge of the path that lay ahead for her daughter. Emma saw visions of the future, herself as a grown woman, helping both animals and people with gifts that bridged the gap between Apache wisdom and modern medicine. The morning star blanket that Joseph had prepared for this moment was placed gently around Rex as his healing reached completion. The traditional Apache blanket, woven with symbols of rebirth and renewal, seemed to glow with inner light as it settled over the dog's restored form. "It is finished," Joseph said, his voice hoarse from the extended chanting but filled with satisfaction. "Rex has chosen to stay, and his spirit is fully healed." Emma collapsed from exhaustion, but was caught by Martha before she could fall. The girl's face was pale but radiant with joy as she looked at Rex, who had begun to explore the area around them with renewed curiosity and energy. The townspeople erupted in spontaneous celebration, amazed witnesses to a miracle that would become legend in Copper Ridge. Even the most skeptical among them could not deny what they had seen: a dying dog restored to health through means that transcended ordinary understanding. Rex padded over to Emma, his movements fluid and pain-free for the first time in weeks. He nuzzled her face gently, his amber eyes bright with intelligence and gratitude. In that simple gesture, he communicated more than words ever could about the bond they shared in his joy at being able to continue their journey together. Dr. Hayes approached cautiously, his medical bag in hand as he sought to understand what had just occurred. "May I examine him?" he asked Joseph respectfully. "Of course," Joseph replied, understanding the veterinarian's need to document what he had. Witness. As Dr. Hayes conducted his examination, he found Rex's vital signs completely normal, better than normal, in fact. The dog's heart beat with the steady rhythm of perfect health. His breathing was clear and unlabored, and his energy levels suggested an animal years younger than his actual age. "This is medically impossible," Dr. Hayes said finally, though his tone carried wonder rather than skepticism. "According to everything I know, this dog should not be alive, let alone healthy." Emma smiled weakly from Martha's arms, still recovering from the spiritual effort she had expended. "Maybe there are different kinds of medicine," she suggested quietly. Rex settled beside Emma with a contented sigh, his healing complete and his purpose renewed. The guardian spirit had chosen to remain in the physical world, drawn by love and sustained by the ancient wisdom that flowed through the girl he was destined to protect. 3 months had passed since the night of Rex's miraculous healing, and Copper Ridge had settled into a new rhythm that acknowledged the presence of ancient wisdom alongside modern progress. The story of what Emma and Joseph had accomplished spread far beyond the small frontier town, drawing visitors who sought healing for their own animals and sometimes for themselves. Emma had recovered completely from the spiritual exhaustion of the ceremony, emerging stronger and more confident in her abilities than ever before. Joseph had begun teaching her regularly, passing on knowledge that connected her not only to her Apache heritage, but to a deeper understanding of the natural world and her place within it. Rex thrived in his renewed health, displaying energy and vitality that amazed everyone who had witnessed his near-death struggle. But more than that, he seemed to have gained an almost mystical awareness, often alerting Emma to the presence of sick or injured animals that needed their help. On this particular morning, Emma sat beside Joseph on his familiar wooden bench, a new leather journal in her lap as she carefully recorded the healing techniques he was teaching her. The journal had been Joseph's gift to mark the beginning of her formal training as a healer, its blank pages representing the knowledge and wisdom that would fill her future. "Remember," Joseph said, as they worked together preparing a poultice, "for a rancher's injured horse, healing is not about imposing your will on another creature. It is about helping them remember their own power to heal." Emma nodded, carefully grinding the medicinal herbs in the wooden bowl that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "Like we did with Rex, we didn't force him to get better. We just helped him choose." "Exactly," Joseph said with approval. "You understand the most important lesson of all." Dr. Hayes had become a frequent visitor to Joseph's healing sessions, his initial skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity about traditional Apache medicine. The veterinarian had begun to see how the old ways could complement rather than compete with modern veterinary science, and he had started incorporating some of Joseph's plant-based remedies into his own practice. "I never thought I'd say this," Dr. Hayes admitted as he watched Emma work with the injured horse, "but there's something to be learned from methods that have been tested for thousands of years." Joseph smiled at the younger man's evolving perspective. "All healing comes from the same source," he said. "Whether we use plants or instruments, ceremonies or surgery, we are simply helping nature restore its own balance." Martha had become one of Joseph's strongest supporters in the community, her practical nature recognizing the genuine value of what he offered. She had also embraced Emma's Apache heritage, helping the girl understand that she could honor both sides of her ancestry without choosing between them. "Your mother would be proud," Martha told Emma as they prepared to close the store for the evening. Charlotte always said that the best way to honor different traditions was to find the wisdom in both. Emma looked up from the journal where she had been recording the day's lessons, her young face thoughtful. "Joseph says I'm lucky because I can see the world through two sets of eyes, Apache and white. He says that makes me a better healer." The townspeople of Copper Ridge had gradually accepted Emma's unique role in their community, bringing their animals to her when conventional treatments failed to provide relief. Even those who remained skeptical about Apache medicine couldn't argue with the results that Emma and Joseph consistently achieved. Sheriff Bradley often stopped by to check on their work, his respect for Joseph having deepened into genuine friendship. "Over the months since Rex's healing, you've brought something special to this town," he told the medicine man one afternoon. "Something we didn't even know we were missing." Mrs. Wells had adjusted her teaching to accommodate Emma's unique educational needs, recognizing that the girl was learning things at Joseph's side that no conventional school could provide. The other children in the class had come to view Emma with a mixture of awe and affection, proud that their classmate possessed such extraordinary abilities. Rex had resumed his role as Emma's constant companion, but his presence now carried an almost protective quality that everyone in town recognized. The dog seemed to understand that Emma's gifts made her special, and he appointed himself as her guardian in ways that went far beyond ordinary pet loyalty. Joseph had found new purpose in training Emma, feeling as though the years of isolation and doubt had been leading to this moment when he could pass on his knowledge to someone capable of carrying it forward. The old medicine man knew that his own time was limited, but he no longer worried about what would happen to the ancient ways after he was gone. "She has the gift," he told Martha one evening as they watched Emma work with a sick calf that had been brought to them for healing. "Not just the technical knowledge, but the spiritual connection that cannot be taught, only awakened." As the seasons changed and Emma continued to grow in both skill and understanding, the bond between her and Joseph deepened into something that transcended the ordinary relationship between teacher and student. He had become the grandfather she had never known, while she represented the daughter he had never had. The journal that Joseph had given Emma filled slowly with carefully recorded knowledge, plant remedies, spiritual techniques, and the stories that preserved Apache wisdom across generations. But more importantly, it documented her own journey of discovery as she learned to embrace all aspects of her heritage. 1 year after Rex's healing, Emma sat with Joseph watching the sunset paint. The desert sky in shades of gold and crimson. Rex rested contentedly at their feet, his coat shining with health and his eyes bright with the contentment of an animal whose purpose had been fulfilled. "Do you think my mother would be proud of what we've done?" Emma asked, her question carrying the weight of all the growth and change she had experienced. Joseph looked at the girl who had become the bridge between two worlds, just as her mother had been before her. "Star who dances is proud," he said with quiet certainty. "She brought us together across time and space so that the ancient ways would not be lost. Through you, her legacy continues." Emma smiled and opened her journal to a fresh page, ready to record whatever wisdom the evening might bring. Rex lifted his graying muzzle to watch the first stars appear in the darkening sky, a guardian spirit at peace with his chosen path. The healing that had begun with a dying dog and a desperate little girl had become something much larger, a restoration of balance between old and new, between skepticism and faith, between the desire to hold on and the wisdom to let go. In the quiet frontier town of Copper Ridge, ancient wisdom had found new expression through the hands and heart of a child who carried the best of both worlds within her.